Are we ready to go with Zoom and MCAT and eScribe?
eScribe is ready.
Yes.
Great, thank you both. I'm going to wait just another minute or two to see if our attendance bumps up a little bit here.
Hey, Jordan, are we voting on this today or is it just an informational item? I didn't see any details on that.
It's just informational today.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good afternoon. I think we can go ahead and get started. Hopefully we'll have a few more members filtering in. I will start with, I'll call the Land Use and Planning Committee to order, and I'll start with our roll call. Currently, Anderson is absent, Becerra is present, Contos is present, Harp is absent, Hess is present, Jones is present, Merritt is present, Ramos is absent, Cheryl is present, Vasika is present, Von Lossberg is absent, and West is present. So we do have a quorum. We have minutes to approve from September 23rd. Are there any changes to those minutes? Okay, those will be approved. And now for public comment, we're still in a virtual meeting format, and I think people know the drill for the most part by now, but if you wish to join this meeting, you can do so on the city website, ci.missoula.mt.us/webcasts. And once you're in the Zoom meeting, you can provide public comment by raising your hand using the hand raise function. If you're joining by phone, press *9 on your phone. If you're watching on YouTube or MCAT or through the agenda system, you can call and leave public comment at 406-552-6012, or you can email us at council@ci.missoula.mt.us. There are no attendees in the meeting right now wishing to give comment, and so we will not take any comment right now, but I'll monitor that, and if anyone comes in, I'll ask for public comment again. We have one piece of committee business today, and that's the Remington Flats subdivision and rezoning. Dave DeGrandpré is here to give our staff report. There's a link to all the application materials within the agenda, and I'll turn it over to Dave for the staff report. Thank you, Dave.
All right, thank you, Jordan. Let's see. I'm going to share my screen now and go ahead and start a presentation. Good afternoon, counselors. Let's see. So you may recall we've discussed this a bit when we were at the last meeting where we discussed the annexation and initial zoning of the project. Today I'll be focusing on that as well as the subdivision and rezoning, but I'd like to go back to the annexation and initial zoning as well, just to provide a little bit of a more comprehensive outlook for discussion of this project. So the Remington Flats subdivision is 152 lots to be developed in 7 phases on approximately 20 acres. The property is located north of the 44 Ranch subdivision. It's in the Mullen Master Plan area. To the west is airport-owned land. To the north is agricultural land. To the east and northeast is also agricultural-owned, or agriculturally used land, I should say. To the east, immediately to the east, is a subdivision that is currently undergoing initial review by city staff, proposed for multifamily type development and also potentially some mixed-use development with some commercial components. You'll probably be seeing that within the next few months. The property has historically been used for agriculture. Again, it's 20 acres in size. There's one small agricultural or one small irrigation ditch located at the southwest corner of the property. You can't see it on the slide, but it's within a culvert right now. Otherwise, there are no other irrigation ditches on the property. There are several pieces to this, which is why you've seen it once and we'll see it a couple more times actually after this. There is the annexation and initial zoning to RT, in other words, residential townhouse 5.4. You've already adopted a resolution of intention for that. And the next phase, which we'll be discussing in more detail today, is to add the Remington Flats Neighborhood Character Overlay District. So it's a new overlay district that would be added to Title 20, the city zoning, that applied that Neighborhood Character Overlay District to this property, and then review the Remington Flats phased subdivision application. And then farther down the road, in the coming months, probably, potentially phases submitted independently. Phase 1 would potentially come in later this year or early next year for your review. So we'll start with the annexation component. In yellow is the city limits, and the subject property is located in the center. So city limits adjoin the property to the west and to the south. The property is located within Annexation Area A of the City of Missoula Annexation Policy. What Annexation Area A refers to is its properties or areas where the majority of the city's annexation guidelines or policy goals are met. And those include things like having a compact development form, walkable area, walkable neighborhoods, access to city water, city sewer, fire, police, and other services, things like that. So in other words, it's a place where the city has determined that more than likely it's appropriate for annexation within the city. This is the future land use map from the Our Missoula 2035 growth policy. And this is a pretty important piece of the review, in my opinion. You can see the subject property that's shown with a red circle around it. And that's shown with in the darker yellow color, that's a residential medium density designation with 3 to 11 dwelling units per acre. In this case, the proposed density is 7.6 dwelling units per acre. And so it fits squarely within that range as recommended by the growth policy. To the west, in that blue-gray color, is all property owned by the Missoula Airport Authority. So that's a kind of a quasi-public growth policy designation. To the north, in the orange color, that's a neighborhood mixed-use type district. And to the north, in the purple color, that's light industrial, proposed light industrial for future growth. In terms of annexation, Montana state law, as well as our local statutes or local regulations, require that at least one of these conditions be met. And in my opinion, all 3 of them are met, but I'll just focus on the last one. Annexation can properly occur when the property and proposed development, proposed zoning is consistent with the land use and zoning recommendations for the subject areas as set forth in the growth policy. And that's what the last slide was intended to illustrate, that the proposed zoning and proposed development is consistent with the recommendation of the future land use map of the R Missoula growth policy. The next piece would be to add the Remington Flats neighborhood character overlay to Title 20. We saw this neighborhood character overlay recently with the Heron's Landing subdivision project. A neighborhood character overlay district, or an overlay in general, is applied to a certain area, overlaying on top of the base zoning. The NC district, neighborhood character district, is intended to either preserve a development pattern or establish a new one, to set up conditions for kind of a consistent type of development. Where standards conflict between an overlay and the base zoning, the overlay governs. And this is not a new thing. It's not first being proposed by this development. I mentioned Heron's Landing, but there are others within the city, Southside Riverfront, Fort Missoula, etc. The Remington Flats neighborhood character overlay it doesn't change or seek to change the base zoning, the RT 5.4 residentials, too much. I mentioned that the RT 5.4, maybe I didn't, but the RT 5.4 is a residential district that's intended for 1 and 2 unit type structures that allows up to 2 units to be attached. This Remington Flats neighborhood character overlay would allow up to 3 attached townhomes instead of 2. Also, it would allow for smaller front setbacks, 10 feet instead of 20, except for where there are garages in the front. And the reason for that is it would still require 20 where there are front garages to make sure that a vehicle could be parked in front of the house, the driveway area. So it's not too big a stretch. It's just instead of allowing up to 2 units attached, it would allow up to 3. So it's a slightly more dense development pattern. When considering zoning, there are standard criteria. The first 2 are actually unique to neighborhood character overlay districts, but the zoning review criteria are properly applied, or the zone change is properly applied when the characteristics of the district would create an identifiable setting, character, and association. In my view, as illustrated in the staff report or described in the staff report, this is intended to provide kind of this neighborhood, and the character overlay is intended to provide a kind of a transition area. You know, to the south, it's larger lot, primarily single family residential. There's some attached to, or actually it's detached housing directly to the south. To the east, a more intensive development pattern, and to the north as well, a more intensive development pattern, and a neighborhood mixed use type commercial residential is recommended by the growth policy. So this would be kind of a transition in a way. You know, it'd be single detached units, it would be duplex type units and triplex type units attached together. So I think it would create an identifiable setting, character, and association. Number 2, it's 20 acres instead of 5, or the minimum is 5, it's 20 acres, so it meets that criterion. And I mentioned before, growth policy compliance, it complies with the future land use map. And then probably don't need to go through all of these right now, but as illustrated or described in the staff report for the zoning, the other criteria I believe are met. Securing safety from fire and other dangers, because property would be served by city fire, police. There's no floodplain, fire hazard is low in the area, and other elements. Public health, safety, and welfare is provided. Public infrastructure, etc. And if you'd like to stop me or would like to discuss any of these criteria, I'm happy to do that. I just thought in the interest of time, we could move through.
That sounds good, Dave. If anyone has questions, just raise your hand and I will recognize you as we go along.
Okay, great. So then moving on to the subdivision proposal, I mentioned earlier, this project is intended to create 152 residential lots. The density is 7.6 dwelling units per acre. And the lots range in size from just under 2,000 square feet to about 5,200 square feet. So it's a it's a traditional urban type development pattern. The developer has proposed with the character overlay, the neighborhood character overlay, for three different types of development: detached single, 2-unit attached, and 3-unit attached. You can see that there's a grid pattern that's laid out in terms of the streets. You've got 2 streets, Tenderfoot and Riata, connecting down to the south to the existing 44 ranch development and proposed to extend to the north to potential future development. The east-west streets, Winchester and Remington, are proposed to connect to the east to forthcoming development. I mentioned McNett Flats subdivision that's currently undergoing staff review and that you'll be seeing probably within the next few months. And then to the west is an extension of Chuckwagon Drive. Chuckwagon, it's not a build grant road, but it's designated on our functional classification map for streets as a collector. And so it would run all the way down to Mullen and then head up to the north. There are 2 20-acre parcels north of this, and then it would bend around toward England Boulevard. So it's intended to provide a good thoroughfare, a collector street that would connect to other planned streets as well. There's a unique component of this project that we talked about a little bit last time that I'll go into more detail, but I just wanted to mention it right off the bat here. And that is the right-of-way for Chuckwagon Drive south of the property is 80 feet wide. And that was negotiated with prior landowners. But as it gets to the property, or on the property itself, that I'm talking about on the west boundary now, there's only an existing 40-foot right-of-way. And so the developer has requested a variance from the 80-foot right-of-way standard. Again, I'll be going into a little more detail here shortly. The proposal is for the project to be developed in 7 phases between, I think it's 17 and about 23 or 24 lots per phase, 1 phase per year, although the developer will have the option of requesting variations to that in the future. The idea is to provide access to the subdivision without impacting or with impacting neighbors to the south of the 44 ranch to a limited degree, to the less extent possible. And Chuckwagon Drive, that's shown in the southwest corner, the lower left-hand corner of the project, or of this map here. It ends right now about 1,000 feet south of this development. And so the developer is proposing to make some improvements to that would allow construction traffic to continue to utilize that road. Phase 1, the developer would put down the base material, the base road material for that street. Phase 2 would end up paving that street. But other developments like 44 Ranch, they're responsible for a portion of this as well. So the timing's a little bit uncertain as to exactly when the project, or when the road, would be completed to city standards. But the idea is the developer would be responsible for a proportionate share of those street improvements necessary to provide access. And Chuckwagon is proposed to be used for construction traffic, so as not to impact 44 Ranch lot owners to the south. And the subdivision would be developed essentially that the pink along the southern boundary of the property would be developed first, and then the red would be second, yellow third, green fourth, etc. So it would be built essentially from east to west. The subdivision is proposed to include sidewalks along all street frontages. That would include boulevards, street trees, and things like that. A final landscaping plan would be reviewed by the Parks and Rec Department. The property is located within a potential area for a second runway for Missoula International Airport. You can see that. You can see the subject property circled in red, and the extended arrival and departure area is shown to encompass a good portion of the property. There are a couple of conditions of approval that are proposed to address this. We're in a bit of a difficult spot. I think Councilor Jones, you asked about that the last time we discussed this, about how communities address this sort of thing. And Montana state law does have requirements, does have a mechanism, a legal mechanism to try to prevent incompatibilities. And what ends up happening is airports adopt airport influence area regulations. They're essentially zoning regulations that govern development in flight paths. And they require oftentimes permits. They oftentimes limit the height of buildings and trees that can be located within certain distance from runways and those sorts of things. So the idea is to prevent some incompatibilities. City of Missoula has also historically required what are called navigation easements. So essentially it's an easement that the airport would have over people's properties, another mechanism to ensure that they could not develop at a height that would impact air traffic. And also essentially it's a way to let people know that there could be you could be under a flight path if you bought a home in this location, and there may be requirements for things like noise barriers, certain windows of certain with certain noise bearing capacity or prevention capacity, walls and other building materials that would prevent noise and vibration from impacting the structure.
Dave, I have a question from Gwen Jones.
Hi, Dave. One of these years I'm going to meet you in person, but until then, we'll just keep doing this. Yeah, thanks for bringing up that subject. It is really interesting. And as I was preparing for today, I was looking at that topic again. And actually, you just kind of mentioned it in your last couple of phrases there. I was thinking, we desperately need housing in Missoula. Given the location close to the airport, I imagine this probably puts us at a little bit of a lower price point, because that is a bit of an issue having the airport so close. But I'm wondering if there's anything requiring additional insulation or anything like that. If I lived there, I would want a really well insulated house so that I didn't hear every airplane going over me all the time. And is that something that the city can require, or how does, I just don't know. It's a strange question, but it was the one issue that I raised in my mind as I looked at it again today. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the city could potentially require certain construction techniques to prevent, conflict, essentially, noise, vibration from impacting a home and that sort of thing. I'd have to look at it in a little more detail. This is a little bit trickier though, because the runway doesn't exist. It's a potential future runway. We don't know when or if it will exist. So, but if that's something that you'd like me to look into, I certainly can.
Well, I would appreciate it. I'm just kind of trying to issue spot, as we have used up a lot of our space to build in Missoula, we're getting to the more difficult places to build. And the better we can issue spot to create a better living scenario, maybe it's worth it. So any information you can come up with on it, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Should I keep moving?
Yeah, go ahead. Thanks, Dave.
Okay. There are specific criteria under Montana law for evaluating subdivisions and whether a subdivision should be approved or whether any conditions of approval might be necessary to mitigate potential impacts. And these are called the primary review criteria. The impacts on agriculture and agricultural water user facilities. I would like to point out that there is agricultural soil. It's considered prime if irrigated, so it's good agricultural soil. And this property has historically been irrigated. However, in thinking about the subdivision and impacts on agriculture and agricultural water user facilities, the project, the property, it's zoned already for residential development under the county at 1 acre per dwelling. And Missoula city growth policy calls for a much higher density of development. So it's essentially planned for, to be the growth area for the city. And so in thinking about that, there is an irrigation ditch that's proposed to be, it's culverted now, but it's proposed to be improved and culverted and then run under Chuckwagon Drive. The property will be removed from agricultural production, there's no doubt, but the water rights are proposed to be severed from the property. And so I guess in summary, yes, there would be potentially impacts to the future of agricultural in this area, but in my view, that decision's kind of been made. And as long as the developer takes the necessary steps to try to make sure that future downstream water users can continue to use that water and get to that water, the developer has done what's necessary. impacts on the natural environment, wildlife, and wildlife habitat. You know, the
Dave,
property,
just 1 minute. While we're on the water piece, I have a question from Julie Merritt.
Sorry, my cat decided he wanted to join the meeting here. Yeah, Dave, I'm not sure that I agree with the concept that the developer has done what he's supposed to do in regards to the water rights. I had emailed you a question about this, and your response was that they addressed it on page 9 of the application. So their answer to the question of, does the subdivision involve the abandonment or transfer of water rights from the property, is yes. And the requirement says, if yes, that they either have to provide documentation that the water rights have been removed from the land, or they have to it has to be denoted on the preliminary plat. And if you look at their preliminary plat, which was a portion of which was shown, I think, a couple of slides ago, their statement is contradictory, because the preliminary plat said, it seems to indicate that it's going to leave the water rights on the property. So they need to, needs to be one way or the other. They can't have both.
you know, I may have, there were 2 rounds of plats, and I may have used, I noticed that in an early stage as well. I'm wondering if I included the first plat and not the second in the report here, in the presentation here. One thing, just
Go ahead.
to follow up on that, I noticed that, and maybe it was an oversight, you know, there should be a condition of approval probably that requires the applicant to sever the water rights and provide evidence of that prior to final plat approval. That isn't included as a condition, and certainly could be, if that's something that you'd like to see.
I would like to see that, because that's it. It leaves it in limbo. If the statement on the preliminary plat says one thing, but the application says another, then they haven't met the requirement, and that's Montana code. They have to meet that requirement. So I would appreciate a condition to that effect.
Okay, thanks, Julie.
Thanks.
Hey, Dave, a point of process on that. In the case of a proposed condition like that, will you bring that back, and that would be something that we would adopt as a function of the public hearing, or the motion after the public hearing? Would that be the process we would use?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Nugent has joined the meeting, which I believe means he may wish to weigh in here. I'm not, Jim, if you do want to weigh in, just let me know. Okay, we can probably continue.
Okay. So moving on to the next.
Jordan, I'm just getting in, so I don't know what the issue is at this moment. I was
okay.
writing
Okay.
something to Don Veru, a response to an inquiry. So I'm belatedly getting here and don't know what the issue is.
Okay, I wasn't sure if you were watching from afar and joining us to comment on something, but we're just we're midway through the Remington Flats staff report. Dave, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay. So impacts on the natural environment, wildlife and wildlife habitat. You know, the property is open land right now. Certainly, it does provide habitat for some species currently. However, the property is not designated by Fish, Wildlife, and Parks or other agencies as critical habitat or winter range, or a very significant type of habitat. One thing that we looked at the staff level, we're concerned about groundwater and potential impacts to groundwater from runoff from vehicles, from impervious surfaces, things like that. The developer has provided a grading and drainage plan to contain the runoff on site, essentially through the use of sumps, like there are in much of Missoula, drainage areas that would collect groundwater, retain it for a period of time, and then it would enter. It would be, surface water collected, then it would slowly enter the groundwater. And so we asked the developer to look into potential impacts, contamination type impacts, as well as the potential for flooding, basements and things like that. There is high groundwater under certain conditions, under storm conditions in the, I guess it's the southwest corner of the property, up to about 9 or 10 feet below the ground surface. So the developer, the covenants are proposed to stipulate that no basements are allowed. There'd be essentially foundations on crawl spaces or slabs only, no full basements. And also in terms of water quality, the developer provided a memorandum from a hydrogeotechnical firm who studied potential impacts and concluded that there would be no significant impacts to groundwater quality in this subdivision, or from this subdivision. In terms of public health and safety, staff has found that there's adequate circulation. The fire department has reviewed and given a preliminary nod of approval to the fire hydrant system. The police department did evaluate this project and expressed a little bit of concern with the density of development, indicating in particular that there may be potential conflicts related to parking. Each lot is required to have 2 off-street parking spaces, but the lots are, they're relatively small. It's urban scale, of course, and so there's also on-street parking that would be allowed. And so I'm just pointing out that the police department did indicate, that could be an issue in the future. But there are nearby medical facilities, no natural hazards, et cetera. So I think impacts to public health and safety would be pretty minimal. Impacts to local services, a little bit about access. There's sufficient access in my estimation to the south, and then also in the future to the east and west. City parks is an issue, or parkland is an issue that has come up. We've received only a few public comments so far through the Engage Missoula website, but parkland, and I've gotten some phone calls as well, and parkland is an issue that's come up more than once. Citizens have wondered why there isn't parkland within this development. And Neil Miner may be here if there are questions, but I can just, he's from the City Parks and Rec Department. But what I can tell you is that when talking with the subdivider about this project, to the south, there's a neighborhood park in the 44 Ranch development, and that was determined to be sufficient for this project to support this development. It's located within half a mile, certainly a walkable distance. And under the subdivision regulations, both at the state level and the local level, residential subdivisions are required to include either parkland or cash in lieu of parkland, or there could be a combination. It's essentially an equation based on the density of the lots. In this case, it's essentially 11% of the area in lots would be dedicated as parkland or cash. And so that equates to about 1.43 acres in this case. And so the Parks and Rec Department asked that cash be provided instead of land, instead of a park, and that cash could be used for improvements on the 44 Ranch neighborhood park to the south.
Dave, I do have several questions here. It looks like Amber, and then Julie, and then Stacy.
Hi, Dave. So if you go back one slide, maybe I misheard this. Did you say, I thought originally you said that fire kind of flagged it as a potential problem, but then you ended by saying police. Would you say what that was again, please?
Sure, I may have mixed my words up, sorry. The fire department has given a preliminary nod of approval, has evaluated the fire hydrant plan and the circulation plan, and found that those plans to be adequate. Now, what will happen though is if you grant preliminary approval to this subdivision, when each phase comes in, the fire department will look at it again to make sure that each phase meets their requirements. So that they appear to be satisfied at this time. With the police department, you'll see in the agency comment folder on the Development Services website that their comment was not particularly strong, but it did point out that there could be, they recognized that this development does comply with the density proposed in the growth policy, but said, one of the most common concerns that they have, or most common complaints that they have in a residential development like this, a residential neighborhood like this, is conflict over parking. Sometimes it would be, someone parking in front of another person's driveway, or things like that. And so they did indicate that it could become an issue in the future.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies.
Thanks. Julie?
Yeah, I see that we have Neil on the line, and if the chair would allow, I guess my request is that Parks and Rec give us an explanation of their justification for allowing cash in lieu in this case. I mean, to speak briefly to that, my own opinion, it seems patently unfair that one developer devoted a substantial amount of land for a park, as the 44 Ranch did, and that subsequently the homeowners have put up money to improve that park and provide playground equipment. And then this developer is going to come along and just take advantage of all of that, if you will. It just seems pretty unfair to me. And I guess I'd like to maybe understand better the decision making around this from Parks and Rec.
Yeah, absolutely, Julie. Neil, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, Neil Miner, Missoula Parks and Recreation. So when we look at the option of whether allowing cash in lieu or parkland dedication, we look at the proximity in the service area of nearby neighborhood parks. In the 2004 Parks Master Plan, that is a half mile radius of existing neighborhood parks. A developed neighborhood park costs about $35,000 a year to maintain. And so we're in areas where we are overparked, like the South Hills or anything, we are paying a lot of taxes for maintenance in those areas, and neighborhoods like North Side, West Side, Franklin to the Fort that are underparked are helping to offset those costs. So in this case, 44 Ranch is the neighborhood park for that area. It's a public park. There are amenities in that, like the fountain and the pond, that are HOA. They wanted a higher level of service than we were able to do. And so they agreed to maintain that pond and fountain out there at 44 Ranch. In regards to the playground, the developer for 44 Ranch developed it to a base level. And I think the thought was that the future phases or developments in that area would happen faster. In this case, with impact fees or cash in lieu options, that cash in lieu can be spent in the service area of that development. So, either 44 Ranch or other parks or trails. I think the intent was always the 44 Ranch development never put in the playground thinking that another development would come in and be able to fund with their cash in lieu, possibly the playground equipment. Obviously that was slower than the neighborhood really wanted. We worked with them to implement, get a grant and a donation, and we just completed that playground in the last month. And so, the option with Heron's Landing to the south of this was also available to do cash in lieu, but they wanted a park, and that's why the Heron's Landing Park will be maintained by HOA, is because it's in the same service area as this park, as 44 Ranch. Hopefully that answered some of your questions. Almost.
I guess I do have one follow-up, if you would allow, Mr. Hess.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, Neil, I thought I just heard you say that cash in lieu can be used in the service area of the existing park. Is that an optional thing, or is that policy that cash in lieu is to be used in the service area?
Cash in lieu can be used with approval from Parks and Rec. So we look at the service area of that existing neighborhood park or wherever this development is. Let's just use it in the general context. The service area is designated in the 2004 Master Parks Plan. Although that's really old at this time, it's still kind of best practices to be 12-minute walk from a park. And so to do cash in lieu, they have to get approval from us. They actually asked to do cash in lieu on this one. And since it was within that 12-minute walk to 44 Ranch Park, I think the furthest house I think we measured was 0.3 miles. So it's well within that half-mile walk to the park.
Thanks. Julie, do you have any additional follow-ups?
No, I'll let someone else go.
Okay. Next, Stacy, followed by Mirta.
Thanks so much. And I actually kind of want to pick up a little bit on the questioning that Ms. Merritt was doing in regards to parks. So when the park so take 44 Ranch, for example, that neighborhood and the amount of park land space commensurate with how many houses are being built, was that taken into effect or kind of was into consideration that another neighborhood down the road is going to opt not to have a park, and so that land or however the equation for homes per park space was taken into consideration, not thinking that the next neighborhood down would also have a neighborhood park? I mean, I worry that it puts a lot of pressure on this neighborhood park when maybe that wasn't the intent when it was built to service that 44 Ranch neighborhood, not all of the surrounding neighborhood. Does that make sense, Neil?
Yes. So the master park plan also refers to a density. So I think it's 2,500 people population per acre of parkland. And so I think our neighborhood park standard, I can't remember the specific size of 44 Ranch and acreage, but I think it's a 2,500 population per acre requirement. There's obviously ways to increase that density, and we could do some of that with the cash in lieu. So like if you look at Pleasant View Park, we have a master plan for Pleasant View Park. If some other developments around there happened, like a picnic shelter or other amenities, like there's, we just installed a playground as part of the bond project in 2015 at Pleasant View. So I think there's ways to increase densities in park or increase the use area of that park. But yeah, I would have to look back at the exact acreage. I know that we looked at it when this Remington Flats started, and it still was within the population density for a park of this size.
Mm-hmm.
Neil, I'm sorry. Can I have you restate that? I didn't quite follow the calculate or how that the calculating works.
It's a per 1 acre of parkland. It is determined. It serves, I think, 2,500 people, and so I think that's our goal: is half-mile walk from the park, and then that density of parkland per population.
Okay, I'm sorry. That makes sense. I just was not wrapping my head around that.
I probably didn't mean to explain it, but that's either. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Stacy, do you have additional questions?
No, I'll let it go. I just at this time, I share some of the concerns that Ms. Merritt brought up, but we'll continue on with the staff presentation. Thank you.
Okay, so Mirta and then Gwen.
Thank you. And my questions are around the same issue. And Neil, you and I have corresponded, and I truly appreciate you educating me on some of this, some of, the issues surrounding this, the parkland dedication and cash in lieu of parkland dedication. So one, and you addressed just now one of my questions, which is how many people, we talk about the distance and that being half a mile radius to service an abutting neighborhood. But the number of people, I think it's also important because this park in 44 Ranch is not that big, and it currently serves a large number of residents, not only from 44 Ranch, but from Flynn Ranch adjacent to it. And now we're going to add another one. So I guess that was going to be my question. Is one thing is the distance, the walkable distance ideally, but the other one is the number of people that it serves. And I just want to make sure that we are still accomplishing that goal. And I guess my big concern is that one of the reasons that it has been stated that we are taking the cash in lieu of parkland dedication is to allow for these homes to have a lower selling point, or having them be more affordable or attainable. At the same time, I think that there's an equity aspect to it. And I think that that could be precisely the population that could benefit from having a playground in a park. So I worry about that aspect of it. And another issue that has been brought up to me by constituents who live in that area is the fact that if this is not walkable enough, people will drive to the park, especially with young children. And this could create a traffic issue or parking issue around the park. So just wondering how all of that plays into the decision to accept the cash in lieu as opposed to the parkland dedication. As you mentioned, you know, we have places like in the West Side and Franklin to the Fort where we don't have more land that we can acquire, so cash in lieu makes sense. But I have always said that this area is like a blank canvas, and it's a great opportunity for us to get it right from the beginning. And so I'm just a little bit concerned about, are we taking advantage of the fact that we can do that? We can plan with enough park in this area to serve as that portion of the community. And lastly, wondering how, if the 16-year-old plan that we have now for parks, do you feel that the needs, the demand for parkland dedication right now are addressed by a plan that hasn't been updated?
Okay, where to start? So I think we've been trying to do, we did the, if you all recall, the open space chapter of the, what we're going to call the PROST, the Parks, Open Space, Recreation, and Trails Plan. I think we've been trying to, in our budgeting sessions, trying to get the funding for hiring a consultant to help with the update of that, the parks component or the rest of it. It just hasn't worked out in the last couple of years. But the 12-minute walk to the park is still best practices. It still meets equity, all the equity needs. These are neighborhood roads with boulevards and street trees. And while they have driveway crossings, I don't think all of Remington Flats will be alley loaded. They still will be a walkable neighborhood. And so we have been looking at that in their initial plans. With the Mullen area master plan in this area, we are looking at where the trails are, where the connectivity is, where those parks lay out in the area as a whole. Like even our master parks plan in this area suggested a community or a regional type park facility in the Mullen area. And so we've been looking at areas out here on doing that. This cash in lieu on these areas will help us acquire some of that or spend it towards developing some of that would serve this use area. If you remember the Hellgate Village, we did a similar cash in lieu, and then the development agreement, there's also a development park identified south of there, a neighborhood park closer to Mullen Road. And I think that those areas, that Hellgate Village was in the use area of Pleasant View, but it's kind of like right spanning that boundary of the half mile. And so, it could be used by Pleasant View, but it could also be served by this new park that's in that development agreement. And so I am fully on board with getting as much parkland as we want, but we need to think long-term on both maintenance, on the maintenance side, the ability to maintain it up to the level of service that we need for a neighborhood park, and then where the just being careful where those parks are to serve the biggest, knowing that the land is valuable in our valley, and you know, if we tie up developable land with parks, and we have a lot of it, and I definitely want a lot, but like for these smaller developments, like Dave said, it's like a 1.3 acres, which our neighborhood park in the master parks plan identified as a 3 to 5 acre park. And so we'll get these smaller chunks of parkland that don't really meet our neighborhood park level of service or size. And so we get these like little portions of parkland places that don't really serve the intended purpose, and we don't ever get those bigger, more usable neighborhood parks.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Neil. Okay, I don't have anyone else in the speaker queue, so I think we can probably move back on through the staff report. Before we do that, are there any additional questions for Neil? Amber?
Yeah, thanks. I'm curious, moving to the school section, you know, I'm just thinking about all the Heron's Landing, we're doing the Mullen area master planning. We're talking about this, you know, we just looked at Expo Parkway and, you know, whether that's going to be developed at what it's proposed for now or not. I'm just curious, like, I keep seeing the school has room for, you know, on these reports, and I'm curious how that, I mean, is it kind of whoever gets approved first that they're counted in those numbers? Like, how are we assessing that number? Because are we looking at potential future students? And I guess that, do you get at my question? Like, it says this in a lot of reports, but then they're all kind of going into the same school potentially. And how do we plan for that? I realize we're not building the schools, but can someone speak to any piece of that for me?
Chairman Hess, I think I can, if that's all right.
Yep, go right ahead, Dave.
Sure. So, yeah, it is interesting. You know, there are just a few quick points. Number one, the superintendent of schools has issued kind of a standard letter saying we have certain capacity, and hasn't raised any concern at all thus far. And every time a new development comes in, early on, they're sent a letter. The superintendent has sent a letter requesting review, comments, and that sort of thing. So, from our perspective at the staff level, we think, well, if there was a red flag, you know, coming in the superintendent's mind, certainly he'd make us aware of it. You know, there's kind of back in 2000, say the year 2000 through about 2007, development was booming across Western Montana. And it was, but a lot of the development that was approved and permitted didn't happen, or maybe just happening now even because of the recession. So you never know exactly what time will bring, what the economy will bring, whether some of these plans will actually come to fruition. And then under Montana law, the legislature Montana subdivision law, the legislature is pretty clear that we can't, the parkland, for example, could be dedicated to schools. You have the authority, if the subdivider wants to do that, if it's a need, you can essentially take that land or the cash in lieu and dedicate it to schools. But Montana law requires that, or states that a subdivision, I'm trying to get the language just right, a subdivision can't be denied based solely on impacts to schools, for one thing. And I think the legislature is actually trying to make a separation. You know, school districts are funded through property taxes and have a separate funding mechanism. We can't require an impact fee at the local government level for schools because they have a whole different funding source. And then lastly, I just want to point out that in the Mullen area master plan, there is an area that's intended to be set aside for future school location. You probably know that already, but it's, you know, whether that happens or not, or when it might happen, I'm not sure. But I guess to get back to the original point, At this point, there does not appear to be concern on the school district's behalf, and so we at the staff level have not kind of elevated this to a red flag.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
Thanks. Gwen and then Julie.
I was just going to add a little bit to that my entire time on council, periodically with developments, this issue of school capacity comes up. And my understanding is that the school districts actually track population very closely. And just as Mr. de Grandpré said, I think with the Mullen master planning process, Hellgate School District was very involved in that, notified of everything. So they're well aware that there's going to be a lot of people living in this area. So Amber, I guess that's one thing I don't worry about. I think they are very much on top of it. And if they say that there's not an issue, then I don't worry about it.
Thanks, Gwen. Julie and then Mirta.
I guess I wonder about the idea that 1.4 or 1.3 acres isn't a valuable amount of land, even for a small park. I mean, it's come up time and again in the presentations we've seen about developments of a need for just people to have a place to take their dog to go pee that's close to their home. It's hard for me to tell, looking at the plans, how big the boulevards are going to be, sidewalks and boulevards here. We haven't talked a whole lot about that, and if that provides adequate space. I mean, having the 44 Ranch Park be the only one in the area does seem everybody's going to be taking their dogs there, and everybody's kids go play there, and those aren't necessarily always the things that we want to have in the same space all the time. I guess enough spins at that.
Thanks, Julie. Mirta, and then after Mirta, we can continue on with the staff report.
I'll make it brief. I just wanted to touch on the school issue. My daughter goes to Hellgate Elementary, and I have participated in many meetings where this issue has been brought up, and I don't mean to speak on behalf of Hellgate Superintendent, but some of his letters have stated very clearly that an additional something like 200 students could be accommodated. More than that would be uncomfortably accommodated in the school as the school as is right now. And certainly, I don't know the legalities of this, but I think that they're not in a position to not admit any more students. They'll just have to take whatever number of new students are designated to attend that school district. So to say that there's no issue, I don't think it's quite accurate. And also that number that he provided was for a subdivision a year or two ago. So that 200 could very well be already have been met with some of the subdivisions that we have or the development that we have approved. So I think it would be interesting to get an updated response from Mr. Reisig at some point. I think that no red flag doesn't mean that it's all okay. Thanks.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we kind of establish, and there's certainly been a long view taken of through this with the school district and with the Mullen Area Master Plan. And I mean, there's absolutely going to be a point in time in the future where there is conflict between capacity at Hellgate Elementary and development patterns in that area. And I think we need to acknowledge that on an ongoing basis because we're putting a tremendous amount of resources through the build grant, through our planning efforts, through so many different channels to target development in this area. and school capacity is a problem to be solved, but it is not an impediment to building this area out in per our planning. In my opinion, I think we need to not let that that there's one school site for an incredibly large area, and that at some point is not going to be adequate. And I think we're all acknowledging that, but I think we just need to kind of continue to talk about that and keep it front of mind. There's no one else with the hand up, so let's carry on with the staff report.
Okay, we'll do a couple quick points before we move on. The most recent letter that I saw from the school district was for the Harris Landing subdivision, so it was quite current, but it did I think mention some of the things that Councilor Becerros also talked about. And then I wanted to get back to a quick comment that Councilor Merritt asked about where money could be spent, the cash in lieu money could be spent. It's not a requirement of Montana law or the local regulations to require that it be spent within an area that serves the future residents of this project or of any project, but it's certainly best practice. And I think if the city of Missoula took cash in lieu of parkland from this project and spent it on a park that really couldn't feasibly be linked to this project, I think there'd be potential for legal challenge. So Parks and Rec and City Council, obviously we need to be, and the planners need to be careful as to where cash in lieu money is spent. It needs to serve the future residents of the subdivision. And then I may have,
Dave, that prompted a couple more hands going up. Neil, you want to add to that?
State law may or may not say where it can be spent, but our best practice is exactly what Dave said. It's in the service area of the park, and that's how we'd also spend the impact fees. I think state law does, or whether it's just best practice or not, but we do spend the impact fees and cash in lieu in the same neighborhood. That is for a neighborhood level park. If it's a community or regional park, you can spend it in a larger area that serves this neighborhood, but that's typically what we do for the city.
Okay, thanks, Neil. Okay, back to you, Dave.
all right, thanks. So there are 4 variances that are requested from our subdivision regulations, and the first 2 have to do with block length. You may recall that our subdivision regulations state that a block is not to be longer than 480 linear feet. And so there are 2 blocks in this project that are just over 500 feet, I think it is. It's in the southwest corner and the northwest corner. And so the first one, variance number 1, it would serve, it's the block with lots 1 through 9. And the reason proposed or stated by the developer in the application is that you can see Chuck Wagon to the west or the left side, and you can see Tenderfoot to the east side. Essentially, the subdivider is trying to match up, provide roads that are in alignment with the existing roads and the existing rights of way. And it's the same thing to the north. Now, to the north, this is variance number 2 for blocks with lots 122 to 135. There is some mitigation proposed. You can see that orange bar. That's where a proposed 10-foot easement and 5-foot wide sidewalk is proposed to be located. It could connect to future development to the north. Right now, it's undeveloped property, but it could be a future trail connection or sidewalk connection to the north to break up the block and provide for pedestrian access. So again, essentially the reason for asking for these variances is to match the existing road pattern. Not matching the road pattern could provide some, some alignment issues, I suppose. It's a neat grid pattern as it is right now. I suppose you could put Browning Drive, that's this one right here. You could extend it potentially to the north. So I guess it's not mandatory, but it does not extend to the south. There are existing lots right here within the 44 ranch. So in any event, those are variances 1 and 2. Variance number 3 is our subdivision regulations have certain right-of-way standards and specification standards for different types of roads. And the types of roads really is based on the amount of traffic that they serve. And they're also their function. So in this case, the roads within the subdivision, with the exception of Chuckwagon, which is to the west, they're all considered low density urban local streets. And so the regulations require that there be a 70-foot right of way. And the developer here is proposing a 64-foot right of way. The specifications for this street includes 2 10-foot driving lanes, 8-foot parking lane on both sides, 7-foot boulevard, 5-foot sidewalk, and then some area for maintenance on the extent or on the outside part of the sidewalk. So this all fits within a 64-foot right of way, and so that's what the developer is requesting instead of a 70. In my view, these are, it's funny, variances under the regulations and Montana law should be based on a hardship. I guess I'm not sure that there's a hardship necessarily, but it certainly works. You have, the road specifications, again, the 10-foot driving lanes, 8-foot parking lanes, et cetera, those comply with your subdivision regulations. So the developer is not requesting any deviation from those standards, but it's just the right of way width. It does provide more area for housing, for lots. And so in that way it's beneficial. I don't see the need for, a turning lane on any of these streets in the future. It's a, low density, low traffic type residential street. So staff has recommended approval and supports this variance request. And then the last one, I mentioned this at the outset or at the beginning of the presentation. It's a bit of a strange situation in that south of the property, there's an 80-foot wide right of way along Chuckwagon. And this was dedicated, negotiated with the Flynn family back several years ago. And it was when the grid road network was being planned out. And so it's 80 foot, it shows Roundup Drive here. That's the same as Chuckwagon. This is along the west side of the property. But it ends on the property. On the property is only a 40-foot existing right of way. To the west of that, and so I'm looking right here, if you can see my cursor move, to the west of that, as I mentioned earlier, is airport land. The airport has not dedicated right of way donated, or there's been no purchase by the city. City administration has talked with the airport authority. I think there's the potential for the airport to provide that right of way in the future. It's kind of a negotiated thing, and it just hasn't happened yet. So in any event, that's the reason. And so what the developer is requesting is that there be what I'd call a half street improvement. And we talked a little bit about this last time. What that would amount to is it would be within the 40-foot right of way along the western side of the property. And it would still include 2 10-foot drive lanes, curb and gutter, 10-foot boulevard, 5-foot sidewalk, and then the idea, and a 2.5-foot shoulder on the west side. The idea is that when and if the additional 40-foot right of way is acquired from the airport authority, that the road could be built out to full standard, full collector standard. And this isn't a situation that the developer really created. It's a situation that's on the property. There's been a plan. I arrived working for the city of Missoula about 7 months ago, and the plan was for the city to acquire the right of way at that time. That was something that was discussed with the developer and before I arrived. And so I think that was the expectation. It just hasn't happened yet. And so again, what this would amount to, if the 40-foot right of way can be acquired from the airport, the property could be built out in alignment with Chuckwagon Drive to the south. And that's the plan. So there are several conditions of approval that are proposed.
I'm going to stop you for a question first, Dave. Heidi?
Thanks. So I have a question around, I guess, variance number 3, which was the smaller right-of-way, the 64 versus the 70. And I was wondering if you had any idea what the gain in unit numbers is for the overall project.
I don't know if there's actually a gain in unit numbers, but it certainly provides for larger lots. Not substantially larger. It's 3.5 feet or so on. Did I get my math right? 3 feet on both sides. On the east and west side of each road, or north and south, I suppose too. But in any event, I don't know that it amounts in a larger number of lots, but provides more area on the lots.
So I guess, can I just make a general comment? Is that
Yeah, go
fine?
ahead.
I guess I'm a little concerned with, I guess, approving a narrower right of way than what we would like to see without there actually being a hardship. I think it potentially could leave, I guess, future people. I could see, granting a narrower, that's hard to say, right away for an overall project like this if there was something we were getting in exchange. If we could have, you could tie affordability metrics to it, or a certain percentage of units. I just think it could be a potentially useful tool, and just granting it without any strategy or hardship. I don't know if that, I guess I feel like it unempowers us to make decisions in the future. I don't know. I'd be curious to know what other people think.
Thanks, Heidi. Julie?
I agree with Heidi. I think in the grander scheme of this, asking for the smaller right-of-way probably does get them additional lots, because every lot has to have its setbacks, and that so they're able to chop it up into small pieces and achieve more lots that they can sell if they have this narrower, that is hard to say, right of way. So I support Heidi's suggestion that we should get something in return, or that they should demonstrate that hardship of why we should grant this.
Okay, let's flag that for a possible question to pose to the applicant about hardship. And I do see that the applicant's representative is here, so we'll give them an opportunity after we get through the staff report. Okay, Dave, you want to go into the conditions?
Sure, I will. Just one quick thing about the right-of-way situation is the Heron's Landing subdivision, very close by to the south, had only 60-foot rights of way for these same types of streets. And 44 Ranch, I'd have to look at what the right-of-way is on those, but just looking at the preliminary plat, it appears to be a little bit narrower than what's proposed here. So there's a consistency and a fairness issue as well.
And it does, if I recall, for Heron's Landing, we approved those variances without a discussion of the hardship question. Is that an accurate characterization?
Well, the hardship is addressed in the staff report. There are findings relating to hardship and reasons for granting the variance, but council approved the variance for 60-foot right of way. They're proposing a little bit wider here. I believe it's to provide a little more area for snow storage and also parking, that sort of thing. But the developer can address that from his perspective. So on the conditions of approval.
Dave, I'm sorry, I actually have one question that I forgot for myself on the variances. On variance number 2, variance number 1, obviously meets up with an existing street pattern. But variance number 2 essentially perpetuates the same street pattern so that whatever comes to the north, continues to have a need for a variance for block lengths. And I'm wondering about if you can kind of speak to appropriateness of variance number 2. I mean, variance number 1 is very clear in terms of meeting up with the existing street pattern. And I'm wondering if you can fill in a little bit on that.
Well, one thing I'm curious about, I don't know the answer to the question, but I know that new specification standards, engineering standards are being developed for the city and may have already been adopted. I'm not sure about that. There may be a new block length standard in there. I don't know that 480 feet is a magic number for a width of block. I mean, the idea behind a limited block length is that it provides for a compact development pattern, one where people are encouraged to walk and have access to different parts of the subdivision. I think between 460 and 540 feet, I think, is kind of a standard in urban design. The Mullen Area Master Plan actually discusses the perimeter of block length. I don't recall exactly what it would be for a neighborhood like this, but in any event, I think your question though is well founded. It would perpetuate this pattern into the, or encourage perpetuation of this pattern to the north. Not ideal if the subdivision regulations stay the same, but I don't know that 480 is a magic number either. So.
Yeah, it's a good question, and again, maybe something that we just keep in conversation about in the future. I'm really excited about the block perimeter concept that you mentioned. I think because a block perimeter of a set amount, a perfect square block is always going to provide the most developable area. So with a perimeter measurement. So I think it would encourage a regular, orderly, predictable development, more so than the block length question. But anyway, that's all I've got on that. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try to speed it up to make sure that there's plenty of time for discussion. The conditions of approval are pretty standard, require half-street improvements for Chuck Wagon, other streets built to city standards, connection to sewer and water, cash in lieu of parkland, petition into the transportation district. I talked about the airport navigation easement and airport influence area statements on the plat. There is one potential, and also I failed to include, as Councilor Merritt brought up earlier, the idea about requiring the water rights to be severed from the property. And there's one change that's recommended by staff, and this is through discussion after the build grant application was not approved most recently. Public Works, the mayor's office, chief administrative officer, and others have been discussing how to make some of these improvements in the Mullen area. And we had originally, condition number 9, as was presented to you originally, talks about a particular monetary contribution for the intersection of Chuck Wagon Drive and Mullen Road to the south of this project. It's an offsite improvement, and there's a sum that's listed here, $83,084. The Public Works office and the mayor's office has asked that be struck, and that what they're looking at is a special impact fee district or some other kind of regional district that's set up to actually fund some of these improvements. So instead of having this develop, and so the city's consultant, the engineering consultant, I think they're called Kittleson and Associates, are currently working on that right now, trying to look at this development, Heron's Landing, some of the other developments in the area, come up with, or some of the other land in the area that could be developed, and come up with kind of a master special improvement district plan for coming up with a proportionate share of funding. So so the Public Works Office has asked that condition number 9 be struck, but the rest be left. And again, the idea is not that these folks, the Remington Flats, would be exempt from those improvements, but that there be a specific mechanism that's in the works right now, that's being developed right now. And then so we have several conditions of approval, of course, for the ordinance to establish the neighborhood character overlay district and to apply that to this property. Approval of the variance requests number 1 and 2 for block length. Approval of variance request number 3 for a 64-foot right-of-way instead of 70 for the local roads. Approval of variance request number 4 to allow Chuck Wagon Drive to be built as a half street within a 40-foot right-of-way instead of 90. And then finally, approval of the Remington Flats phase subdivision plat and application based on the findings of fact and recommended conditions as amended by council.
Great, thank you, Dave. Can you talk about the timeline and our statutory deadline and what we're looking at moving forward?
What we're looking at moving forward is a public hearing on October 5th that would be continued, scheduled to be continued to, I don't have the date in front of me. I think it's 2 weeks later. The statutory deadline for making a decision on this application is November 3rd. You would have the option, you do have the option of asking the developer for an extension if necessary, but if we could do it by the 3rd, that would be probably best.
Sure, and we have a little bit more of a cushion than we do sometimes, I guess, with after the public hearing, that is. So, okay. So there's no one in the speaker queue. The applicant is here. Would 406 Engineering is here. And if you don't mind, whoever's on the 406 engineering team today, if you don't mind using the hand raise function, if you'd like to say something, perfect. And I'm going to actually promote you into the meeting. And okay, so you should be in the meeting now, and you should be able to join using, and you should be able to add your camera and then unmute.
All right.
There we go. Hi.
You guys can hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I got a quick slideshow if you guys want. I can address, from listening to this, hopefully address some of the questions that you guys had. I'll try and make it quick so that I'm not boring you guys too much. But is it, if I do a share screen, do I need to ask for that on here?
You should be able to now. You
Okay.
should have this share screen at the bottom.
Okay, perfect. So you guys can see my screen?
Not yet.
There we go.
There we go. It's
Okay, perfect. So try not to rehash too much of what Dave went over. He had a great presentation, so I'll just kind of go through a lot of this. You guys already are fully aware of the location of the subdivision. Currently, the current conditions are, it's literally a flat blank field that's out there right in the middle of the growth policy. Here is what the subdivision would look like as far as utilities that are already there. The blue is the water and the green is the sewer. So it's showing, this map kind of shows with the grid pattern that exists, the water and sewer that's there. Just kind of with the idea that the planning was already taken into account for developing the lot here to the north. All right, there we go. So, right in the middle of the growth plan, our site is the star. One thing with this, it is the same growth policy as 44 Ranch and Heron's Landing. We will have a higher density. Part of this is making that transition point between the medium to high residential, which is the 12 to 24 units per acre that is to the north and then to the east of this site. So you're going to see that our site is right, I think, at about 7.6 dwelling units per acre, where 44 Ranch is right around 4. So we're kind of hitting that transition. Goal for this area is 3 to 11, so we kind of fall right in the middle of that. Zoning, we are hoping to get RT 5.4 zoning with the neighborhood character overlay. That would allow us to be, like I said, right at that 7.6. The max you could get with the RT 5.4 is 8, so you would never get above 8 if any phasing amendments or anything were to happen. But right now, with the plan that we're showing, and that will be highly unlikely that would change, we would be at 7.6 dwelling units or lots per acre. Our proposed layout on here, again, very much a standard grid pattern. Jordan, I know you did ask about changing as far as variance number 2. We did look at moving this road and then the following road over a little bit to then extend some of the block lengths, but it just kind of threw a weird hitch into the way the roads were laid out. Planning didn't like the idea of it, and it didn't really seem to flow. So to help minimize that idea, the sidewalk in between in the middle of the lot to help with pedestrian, the reason for the block length is to cut down on walking to help reduce that, is kind of the mitigation for that variance. So the development group for this is Denali Group. The main controlling members are Brian Beaucamp with Beaucamp Construction, Lance Cox, and Jeremy Williams. All 3 of these guys live in Missoula. They are from Missoula. They've been building here for a long time. They really want to have a development that they're going to drive by all the time. They're not somewhere out of town that's coming in to develop this, and then it's just another project on their board. These guys, I know Lance currently lives in the Aspens, one of their last developments that they did. His home and residence is within the development that they've done. They are a builder as well, so they will be building a large chunk of these lots. Lance and Brian are custom home builders, so they will have do a lot of the building. They may sell some of the lots, but the idea is to have them do the development. These are a couple of the recent subdivisions they did: Waterwheel subdivision off 3rd Street, and then Aspen Townhomes more in the middle of town. Both of these are just recently wrapping up. In fact, Waterwheel phase 2 is, and the houses are still being built in it, but this is the phase 1 part. They also both have custom homes that are being built in 44 Ranch, Ranch Club, Linda Vista, Invermere, and others. So well-versed within our community, really understand what Missoula is about. And I think the developers that you guys would hope to have doing this project. So phasing and traffic flow. One thing to hit on the phasing, I know the school part is a big question, but if you look at Heron's Landing phasing plan, our phasing plan, even 44 Ranch, if you look, by the time everything is added, we're talking 2034, so 14 years from now, that you would have full build out. So the schools aren't going to be inundated right away. And I think Heron's Landing is actually got 2045. So within hopefully, the next 14 to 25 years, as this stuff goes at max speed, we would have time to talk more on what that really means to schools. These will be, slowly integrated, and it won't be just overnight. All of a sudden, Hellgate is overrun. So there is time to, as that discussion and to really analyze what that means. Our phasing plan would start along the bottom with phase 1, the closest part to 44 Ranch. Part of phase 1 would be to the offsite improvement of Chuckwagon would be to put in the construction gravel base. The last thing we want to do is run a bunch of concrete trucks, cranes for trusses, anything like that through 44 Ranch. So as Chuckwagon is already a collector road, this gravel road we put in and all construction traffic will be run around the existing 44 Ranch to help mitigate that. Now, once that's done, residential traffic will flow, at least for this phase, back down through 44 Ranch. But once phase 2 is underway, then Chuckwagon Drive will then be paved, and then all residential traffic will go out on the collector road of Chuckwagon Drive, not running through 44 Ranch. So, there may be some changes as these roads connect up, and George Elmer is just to the east of the project. People may head out that way. We can't control a lot of that. That's just part of the connectivity. But as everything lies right now, the traffic would leave down Chuckwagon and not exit through 44 Ranch. A little bit different for this phasing plan, unlike other ones. The phasing is going to be built basically from the back end of the project out. That way, as the project gets done, construction traffic is not running over finished roads, finished curb. If any traffic has to go to them, will go basically on the northern route, which will be later phases, so that base will be put in. And everybody within phase 1 can be left alone, and we're not beating up the roads all the time. And that's one thing that these guys, as builders, have noticed within their projects, that as they phase, they really end up screwing up the finished product and running all this construction traffic and heavy, a concrete truck is worth 5,000 regular vehicles, just the weight and the damage it does. So if you can avoid sending those kind of vehicles down your road, it saves the roads in the long run. Again, just, a little more of it. Phase 4 and 5, same thing as 2 and 3 built out. And then phase 6 and phase 7 will then be finalized. Talking on variance 4 that we talked about before, this was the idea that we don't have the furthest west half of Chuckwagon for easement right now. As you guys can see, within phase 1, that half road, if we built that right now, one, it's only construction traffic that would come in that way before we really needed to build a full road. And then again, by the time we hit phase 7, we're talking 14 years from now to really finish out that Chuckwagon. So hopefully within the next 14 years, we can acquire that easement, and then Chuckwagon can get built out the full standard, not the half road that the variance is currently showing. So The variance really is to get us through phase 1 on that side of Chuckwagon and at least get that completed a little bit without screwing the proposed currently already established alignment of Chuckwagon Drive. Here are this road sections we talked about. We are proposing a little bit bigger than standard for our typical interior road section. With those guys having their developments, building roads, parking is an issue, and parking becomes a real big issue when they go to plow the streets. So they wanted, instead of 7-foot standard parking, they asked if they could do 8 on this. That way, as snow removal happens, you can still park a vehicle and actually have 2 cars go side by side within the subdivision. 7-foot boulevards, 5-foot sidewalks are standard, but that does put us at that 64-foot right of way. The one thing with that, it is true that, so 44 Ranch is 60 feet, Heron's 90 will be 60 feet. We went to 64 just because we asked for a bigger road and then 1 foot of maintenance for sidewalk on the outside. There is not a ton of hardship. The one thing that does is if we go to 70 feet, we're getting really high within our dwelling units per acre. And even that extra 3 feet doesn't seem like much, but it does add up as far as setbacks and everything else that goes with the smaller lots that we're trying to accomplish within the subdivision. One thing that we do have, I'll scroll back up to look at, we do have alley load in a few places. So one thing that was brought up in the land board was, you know, we don't have very much alley load and we're showing a lot of front load. The one thing we run into is the Missoula standards are if you have an alley, you have to load to it. So that means every single house with an alley load has to go to the alley. Now, with Jeremy being a real estate agent and talking to different people within the city, he seemed to sell within the price point that we're looking at, young families that would have kids that would really like a backyard. When you have an alley load, you tend to lose a lot of your backyard. And these guys think that their clientele or the people that will want to live in here will be young families that would prefer a backyard over having an alley load. So one thing we did is we do have a few alley loads to mix it up. And I know not everybody wants to do front load. The problem is we have to pick one or the other. And it feels like more people would rather have a front load than an alley load. And here's one reason to just give an example of that. Here is what an alley load looks like. So here's a picture within, you know, Missoula of this is Water Wheel phase 1. This is an alley load on the right. So that house is a recently built. Your garage is only 10 feet from the alley, so you actually cannot park in your garage. So unlike a front load where you have 20-foot setback where you can park 2 cars in front of your garage, as well as in your garage, within an alley load, if you store anything in your garage like I do, you would have to park on the street. So you cannot park in front of your garage. You just don't have the room with the 10 feet. If you look at the picture on the left, there are 2 identical lots. Basically one with an alley load. This is within 44 Ranch. This kind of got a little slip through the house. I know that's shown here with the front load got slipped through the cracks as far as zoning, and that's why it got to be a front load. But the picture does illustrate the amount of backyard that is achieved versus the house on the right on the same size lot. So that's one thing as these guys look, that if you have young kids like I do, I know I'd rather get to play with them in a backyard versus not having to worry about cars and everything of them playing in the front yard. So just kind of an example of if you have to pick one or the other. Currently, our guys, our developers are seeing that more people are requesting a front load than an alley load. Doesn't mean everybody, but that is why we don't have much for alley loads on this project. We did do parking though. One thing we did do.
Can I cut you off there for a question? We've got a question from Julie Merritt.
Yeah.
Just while you're on that point, I really appreciate that you explained that, because I was particularly curious why there weren't more alleys. The backyards backing up to each other sometimes seems problematic. But if that's the case, if that's what the regulation says, then I think maybe it's a bum regulation, but I really appreciate your explanation.
Yeah, no problem. And one thing to address, so the parking, we did do a parking analysis to understand how much parking we really had, showing, alley load, 2-car garage parking, showing what we can get for standard city parking between our driveways, as well as on Winchester Remington drives, there is a lot of parking. With doing that extra, there's parking on all these streets. So we have off-street parking, 385 spots available and 160 on-street. So when you have 152 lots, it averages about 3.5 cars worth of parking per house. So we're hoping that we have addressed and there is enough parking within this, that within the front load or the alley load, the combo that we're showing, the parking should hopefully not be an issue, because we know that was brought up with the police as well as other comments that we've had. So just a little bit bigger picture. One thing we did, like you guys can see on here, everything, all the driveways are laid out to understand what we can really get for parking in between each of those driveways, and to have a little more thought process in that versus just letting everybody put their driveways willy-nilly and then nobody can park between them. So one of the last things to talk about, the cash and loan parks, this is a big deal, and I definitely understand where everybody is coming from, saying, 44 Ranch put in the time, they put in the park. One thing I challenge on, I live in the Linda Vista area. I know when I go by Maryland Park on Linda Vista Drive that it's full of kids. It has a water park and playground equipment and a tennis court. It has all that stuff and it is used. When you go up the road 300 yards, there's Whitetail Park, which is just a big open space that was dedicated. That is probably 4 or 5 acres, and there's never anybody at it. It's a park that needs to be maintained, that doesn't get used. And I think, the idea of improving a bigger park that would get more use, the kids would go to the playground equipment, they would go play basketball, versus just an open space would probably get more use. It might not, and you can't accommodate, there's definitely different people, but I think if you had to pick one or the other, I think it would get more use at the 44 Ranch Park than having a small 1.5 acre park within our subdivision for somebody to have a few dogs at versus kids to go play at or anything like that. So on the staff report, we've talked to Dave with this a little bit. We agree with definitely most items in the staff report. We just want to sit down with the city a little more for streetlights on Chuckwagon and see what the streetlight improvement district would be. Item 9, since we made this, Dave has scratched that, so that one can be scratched. But the big one that I know, us at 406 Engineering, as well as Denali Group, the item 10, as far as additional costs with the Mullen Area Build Grant, before we could really agree to that too much, the one thing is that it seems kind of like an open checkbook right now, since there's no set costs or set idea or what that really means. And it's hard as a developer to go into a subdivision and agree to something when you don't really know, is that going to add $200 for a lot or $20,000 per lot? So it would be nice at some point, probably before the final city council meeting, that we at least sit down with the city and get this ironed out a little bit, just to make everybody feel a little better what it really means. So that's it. Hopefully that answered some questions and didn't bore everybody too much.
That's great. Thanks a lot. That was really helpful. So at this point, we've got about 20 minutes left. So this is pre-public hearing, so we don't need to hash anything out in terms of opinion at this point, but it would be a great opportunity to ask questions, to suggest any potential things that, if we need any other changes to conditions or anything like that, or so on. You all know the drill. Mirta.
Thank you. I had a question for Dave. That condition that got removed with that fee, I'm wondering if there's something that's going to be on the plat for the development that waives the right to protest paying that fee once that fee structure is developed. Do you get my question? I'm just trying
So,
if a fee, once we have a fee structure, will be associated to this development, and if so, is that going to be recorded somewhere?
sure. So the discussion as it's been most recently is that there would be an impact fee type district. And so impact fees are typically paid, they can be paid at two different times. One, when a building permit is issued, or when a certificate of occupancy. So when after the home is built, when a certificate of occupancy is issued, which allows people to enter it. So that would be, it's envisioned right now that that's the mechanism for funding, or at least helping to fund the improvement to the Mullen Road Chuckwagon intersection. But what I'd like to do, I guess, I think what you're saying is you want to make sure that the fees are collected and that homeowners, if they're purchasing a lot, or lot owners are aware that it's coming their way. And so, is that correct?
Exactly, because I think right now, if the developer were to pay a fee, it would be associated to the developer, and with the condition being removed, then it gets passed on to the potential buyers. And so I just want to make sure that people, when they buy the lot or their house, that they are aware that that fee exists and needs to be collected.
I'll try to find out a little bit more information as to the direction that that's going for the October 5th public hearing.
Thank you.
Thanks. Julie and then Heidi.
I guess my question is for the applicant's representative. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. Is that Brock?
It's Brian Throckmorton. So Brian.
Okay, Brian. Okay. All right. I wonder if you could just restate those numbers around parking. It just went by fast and I didn't quite catch that.
Yeah, so we would have 160 basically on street and then 385 off street. So that would be a garage and then in front of your garage.
Excellent.
Heidi?
I guess I have a comment maybe about the possibility of the fee to build out the infrastructure. I would like to know a little bit more about that as well, maybe at the public hearing, but my comment would be if it doesn't make any difference and it's collected either way, it seems like it would make more sense to have it at the time of the occupancy permit, just because if it's at the time of building permit issue, then, it takes who knows? It's taken me 2 years to work on my house, which in that case, there's just carrying costs, something to think about, so.
Brian, in your presentation, you had a couple of, on the last page where you brought up the issue, those items were numbered. What did those correspond to? Was that something in the staff report, or what did those numbers correspond to?
Yeah, so those are the staff report item numbers.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And I think that number 10, in terms of meeting with the staff is on the build grant. Obviously that's changed so much. I think that'd be a really productive thing to do between now and the next meeting. And if there's anything I can do to kind of help facilitate that, I'd be more than happy to. But I think it's probably a case of us knowing a whole lot more than we did when the application was submitted. I don't know, Dave, do you have any other updates on that?
No, I don't at this time.
Okay.
Yeah. To reiterate, I mean, nobody's against it. We just want to make sure. We just don't know, like I said, if it's $400 or $20,000, and So there's just a big chunk of that that just needs to be
Ever
known.
did you wash your bowling?
There's a big difference between those two.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so I don't have anyone else up with hands up. There are no members of the public in the meeting. I guess, does anyone have anything else to add before we adjourn?
Jordan,
like
just one thing to add.
Yeah,
and
go
that
ahead, Dave.
is Jim Nugent we were talking about parkland and cash in lieu and how and where that can be spent. He did give me a citation from Montana law saying that the governing body shall use dedicated cash in lieu money for the development, acquisition, or maintenance of parks to serve the subdivision. So it's not just a best practice, it's actually required by law. That if you collect cash in lieu, it needs to serve the future residents.
Okay, thank you. All right, anyone else? Okay, so we'll have this back for a public hearing on October 5th. And if anyone has questions in the meantime, feel free to send them to me and Dave, and we will get those answered. So thanks, everyone, and we'll be adjourned.